Hello and welcome to another episode of the Iospa Tech Security channel. Today we're going to be talking about various types of MFA, which stands for Multi Factor Authentication. You've probably heard of it, you've probably used some form of it, but today we're going to talk about those forms that apply specifically to Google. Google accounts being your personal Gmail account or perhaps your company using G Suite. All of those same options will be available to you. All of the stuff we're going to talk about today is available without any additional licensing costs, so that's going to be like our constraint. And we're going to go through what the differences are, which ones are considered stronger, which ones are considered weaker, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let's jump in. So here we have our Gmail account. And in order to access the settings that we need in order to access the security portion, we have to go into this little avatar, and you're going to hit Manage Your Google Account here. And then you're going to scroll over on the left side to the Security tab. When you select the Security tab, you're going to see an option here called Two-Step Verification. Now, I mentioned generally it's called Multi Factor Authentication or MFA. However, it's known by many different names. One of the names you'll see is Two-Step Verification. That's almost Google specific. There's only a handful of other companies that go by this name. You'll also see it as additional verification, maybe 2FA or TFA, right? So all of that meaning second factor of authentication. The name doesn't matter so much as the concept behind it. And so we're going to jump right in. We're going to hit Get Started. It's just kind of giving you a brief intro, which I've already actually done for you. I'm just going to enter the password real quick and hit Next. And you have some options right off the bat. Now, we're not going to go through configuring the phone number because we're going to talk about why that's a bad idea. And before we continue further with configuring these, I'd like to just jump into a very small presentation that I made here talking about the differences of different types of MFA. So let's just jump right in. So we have the most secure kind, which would be a hardware token. That could be a YubiKey, which is a specific brand, or it could be any key that uses the WebAuthn or FIDO certification. There's a couple of advantages to these keys. The first one is that they're the most secure type of authentication you can have today. And as a key factor, today they're regarded as unphishable by most security professionals, including myself. They're very easy to use. They're low maintenance from the IT side, but they do have some cons. The first one is that there is obviously a cost to purchasing a piece of hardware. Generally, you're talking about $15 to $20. However, the more fancy ones, the ones that support Bluetooth, for example, or have micro USB or USB-C or other attachments to them, they can easily go up to $50, $60, even $70 for the ones that support the Lightning connector, for example. The initial configuration can be a little bit more of a challenge, and that is if you're trying to do it centralized. From the user side, it's all very simple. The user training is required because you do need to let users know how they're going to be utilizing the device, right? In what cases they need to expect to have this device present with them. And there's also a replacement cost, right? So if they lose this device, they can't sign into their accounts. So some companies may choose to issue 2 devices right away to every employee just to make sure they're never locked out of their accounts. And the last one is that, somebody's obviously got to do all of this. Somebody's got to keep track of who's got which key, and somebody's got to disable those keys when people leave. So there's obviously some constraints there. Let me show you what this physically looks like. So here I have a key from another brand. I forgot the name of this brand actually. Fedian, sorry. And then here we have a key from YubiKey. Now, to give you an idea, this one's about 3 years old, and you can see a couple of scuff marks. It's been riding on my keys for these 3 years, but it still works perfectly, right? And this is basically a brand new key that I was actually shipped as a sample. Now, the next one is called phone app-based verification. So what this means is you have an app on your phone that sends you a push. This could be Microsoft Authenticator. This could be the Google native app that you have on your phone. Or this could be another third party like Okta or Duo or OneLogin or a myriad of other applications by those by various vendors. Now, these can be very secure. However, there's a prerequisite. Unlike the YubiKey that by definition is unphishable because it actually performs cryptographic verification with the site itself, this provides the information to the user and requires them to make the decision of, do I want to authenticate here or not? The advantage here is it provides excellent visibility. Not only do you see who authenticated at what time, which is all the information that you could possibly get from a YubiKey, you can also see where their device was physically located, right? So a lot of times you'll get, when you have some kind of fraudulent authentication, you'll see that the actual authentication occurred, let's say in New York, New York, but the push was approved, for example, in LA. And so obviously you have a mismatch between locations, and that by itself can be a trigger that you can use to flag suspicious activity. So there are some advantages here. Another one that's really nice is device hygiene verification. So you can actually require that the device meets certain prerequisites before it can be used. And the last piece is obviously very easy redeployment, right? So you have a user that's remote, they lost their phone, you need to get them into another device. So there's a couple of advantages with this push-based verification because they can actually install this on some spare phone that they have laying around, and you can have them up and running in 5 minutes. Not so with the YubiKey, right? Unless they can get their physical hands on a new device, you can't really do much. The cons here are that users can see this as invasive. Um, they're, we've had users come to us and say, I don't want to install apps on my phone. This is really a company culture question. This isn't an IT security question, so I'm going to move on just mentioning that. For poorly trained users, in my opinion, this can actually be a huge security risk because I've seen users just blanket approve every request that comes to their phone without actually looking at what's on there. Fundamentally, you have to understand users don't care about your data. Users care about doing their job and going home, right? Their job is not protecting their data, at least not in their mind. And the last one is that this relies on having a device that you have to install it on. So either the company has to issue a phone to people or they will be asked to use their personal device. So you do have to keep that in mind, right? One, it's invasive because users may ask, hey, are you using this? Are you pulling any data from my phone? Are you, using my battery life? Are you using phone resources? Or, you'll run into the edge case where a user goes, my phone is really old, I can't use this, right? So you do have to plan for those contingencies and you do have to have a method of working around those if you are going to choose this method. The next one is the simplest of the high-tech options, I would say, right? So this is Google Authenticator. Everybody's seen this. This comes in two flavors. There's TOTP, which stands for time-based, and HOTP, which stands for HMAC-based, one-time password, right? The OTP is the same. It's one-time password. And essentially what it does is the TOTP one-time password means every 30 seconds or so, you're going to have a change in the password. And this has some advantages. So number one, this is a cheap/free implementation. The reason I say cheap/free is the original implementation from Google is actually free. You can download the SDKs and all the APIs and implement it yourself. They don't charge you any kind of licensing fee. There's also no fees in terms of how many users you have or anything like that. So that's super nice. The next thing is it gives a pretty reasonable level of security, right? Because that code is changing, it's not really feasible for someone to guess it. So at that point, the attacker would have to be fairly sophisticated. They would have to phish that code. And it depends on the type of attack you're trying to prevent, right? But again, this is one step lower, in my opinion, than the phone app-based push verification. The next thing is this has excellent compatibility with other services. So if you already have a password manager that has the ability to store two-factor authentication codes, for example, 1Password is very good at this. This would be a very good candidate for you to implement in that setting, right? Because you have very good backwards compatibility with things you're already using. There are some cons here. The number one con is it feels very dated, right? So this was a thing that was released years ago. Users used it. They weren't too happy about it, which is why push-based verification kind of became a thing. There's a lack of centralization and visibility, right? So the same thing that you have with a YubiKey, right? Where, yes, a user authenticated, but where did that authentication actually occur? Well, you don't actually have access to that information. This still requires a device for you to keep it on, But now again, if you have a password manager where you're able to store these MFA codes, that problem solves itself. So that may or may not be a con depending on your implementation. The last one is recovery, right? So recovery and redeployment, you have to think of how you're going to do those things. How is a user going to get back in? And again, if it's free, it doesn't mean it has no cost. It just means there's no licensing cost, right? So you still have some overhead that you need to consider. The last one is the worst. This is basically just one step above having no multi-factor authentication at all, and this is called SMS-based MFA. So this is what you probably use for your banks, possibly your investment accounts, and it's ironic because the stuff that you want to protect the most, right, your finances, is secured by these super weak accounts. So what happens here is something called a SIM port out attack, and that's the main issue here. There are some advantages to these, but really the disadvantage, in my opinion, outweighs the advantage. If anything else at all is possible, don't use this. This is by far the worst, right? So let's go through the pros and cons, give it a fair shake. The pros, it's highly convenient, right? So a user always has their device with them. Let's be real, it's 21st century. We're glued to our phones all day long. So if a text comes in, you already have it immediately. It's unintrusive because you're not actually installing anything on the device. It doesn't let you track anything. And because it's so ubiquitous, right? Everybody's using it for all their other services. It requires little to no training. It's super easy to deploy because all you need is really the person's phone number. And there's no added work during upgrades or replacements because obviously if they're just not changing their number, then nothing has changed. They're still going to get the same text message. The cons, it's highly vulnerable, right? So one, those codes can be intercepted. Those codes typically go through a series of other vendors in the cloud before they reach your phone. Each of those vendors has that code. So if an attacker was able to get into one of those vendors, think Twilio or I forgot the name of another vendor that does the same thing as Twilio, but let's pretend that Twilio is the only one. So if someone got into Twilio, right now they have access to all of these two-factor codes for all of these different people. And so they can intercept that code before it even gets to you. So if they're trying to get into your account and you have a weak password, then this is really not much of a safeguard, right? The next one is there are attacks for this that work for all the other factors of authentication, right? So if it works for push, if it works for the Google Authenticator, and those attacks would be things like phishing, right? Spear phishing. If it works, they're able to adapt those attacks to the SMS part as well. The main one to worry about is that SIM port out attack. So what happens is they port out your number to another carrier and they put it on a different phone, and now they're able to get all the verification codes that they need, right? Because all of those are just coming to that phone. And the worst part is because they've stolen your phone, a lot of people now don't even have a home phone, right? So if they port out your phone, you can't even call to complain about it because you don't have a number to call from. So it's a pretty interesting attack, especially nowadays. I've already spoken about the MFA codes in transit, codes being intercepted, and the last one is it's very difficult to visualize these logs because, again, you have no idea where they're actually authenticating from. So now let's go in and do a practical demo here. We're back to Google, and we're going to take a look at how this is actually done with Google. So let's take the security key, and that's going to be the first thing that we're going to authenticate with. And what it says is make sure you have a security key or an eligible phone. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually plugging the FedIan key into the USB of my computer, and it's got a little light on it so you can see it. And what we're doing now is hitting next. And so it's going to try and authenticate with this key, and it's saying, hey, do you have this, do you want to set this up? And so the first thing that I have to do is from the browser, I have to actually allow it. And what I'm allowing is for the browser and the key to essentially do a certificate exchange between themselves. So if I'm going to hit OK, it's saying this is going to allow the key, this is going to allow the browser to see your model and whatnot. And obviously we want to say OK to all of this. And now it's saying, hey, on the key, can you push the button so that we can see it both ways, right? And so here, let's just call it key one just for simplicity. And so we've added a key. And now The problem with these keys is obviously you can see that it's very vulnerable, right? I'm gonna just switch to the camera real quick. You can see that this key is actually very vulnerable. So here's the physical key. So if you can imagine that this gets stuck in a door jamb or something, right? It could conceivably snap. So if you are using this as your primary factor of authentication, you want to make sure that you have more than one key. And so what we're doing now is we're going to take my other pair of keys and we're going to stick that YubiKey inside, and now we're going to add a second security key. And it's saying, do you have it? And it's connected. So same thing, right? We'd give it all the permissions that it's asking for. And now we're going to touch the button on the key, and we've named it, and we're going to name it just key 2. Again, you just want to name it something you can identify it with later, because if you lost key 1, you want to delete it from here, and you want to replace it with another key. Now, there's another option that you have with Google, and we're just going to go through this whole list in the order that we have them here. And these are just backup codes. So if you have backup codes, what that means is that this code is essentially a one-time password that will work for your account as a second factor of authentication no matter what, right? So whether you have the YubiKey or whether you don't, these codes will work. So if you find yourself trying to get access to your Google account, and this is critical, from a device that does not support your YubiKey, you can still get into it with these backup codes, right? And each code can only be used one time, and if you want new codes, just hit get new codes, right? So I'll close this out. Once you've gotten the codes, you can come back to this screen at any time and just hit show codes, okay? It will, however, ask you for your password if you haven't authenticated in the last couple of minutes, right? The next one is really cool. This is the phone-based authenticator, right? And it's called Google Prompts. And in this case, what we are going to do is we'll have to add this account to our phone in order for this to work. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit Add Phone, and I'll just show you what it's trying to tell me to do. I actually have to authenticate into this device as itself, as the account itself, so that I can take advantage of this functionality. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to get into this device because I've created a super long password here. I'm going to get into this device and then we'll resume. So actually I'm going to resume the video before I'm fully done because I want to share something with you. So because of the fact that we've added these security keys and I don't have one, I don't have an adapter handy that can convert USB-A to Lightning. I have one somewhere, but I don't know where I put it. What we're going to do is we're going to use these backup codes, and I want to show you how they work. So right now on my phone, and I'm going to show the camera real quick, I am actually at the sign-on screen, right? So you can see the sign-on screen. You can see that it's for this account. I've put in the password. When I hit next, it's going to ask me for my two-step verification. And here I'm going to select try another way. And when I select try another way, it says, hey, which way do you want to try? And one of these says get a one-time security code, and one of them says enter one of your 8-digit backup codes. And so that's the one that we're going to enter here. So let me just switch this back to the screen. Sorry about that. So back on the screen, we're going to grab this code, and I'm just going to grab this first one, and then I'll show you how this works. So it's 96745120. Okay. And once I verify, what happens is close this out. And if we refresh this page, it will show you that that code has already been used, right? And so on my phone, we've already authenticated, and then you can see that this is all live, right? So if we refresh this page, you can see that you have 9 codes left, not 10. And you can also see that this has been set up and it's going to my iPhone, right? So again, this is just another factor, and now we've configured it. So the next one we can do if we wanted to is the Authenticator app. I'm going to just make sure that I have one, and I'll resume the video then. Okay, so just for this, I have actually downloaded the Authenticator app from Google, and I'm just going to, again, show my screen so you can see what's on here. So as soon as you download the app, it tells you set up your first account, right? And so you have the option for scan a QR code or enter a setup key. I highly recommend the QR code function if it works, and so I'm going to walk you through doing that. So it's asking what kind of device do I have. I'm going to say iPhone, and hit next. And on the phone, I'm selecting the option for scan a QR code, and it's asking for permission to use the camera. I'm going to say OK. I scanned it, and now I have a code. So now I have to hit next, and I have to authenticate with the code that I'm seeing here so that the app can verify that it's actually going to work, so you don't wind up locking yourself out of the account. Okay, so we've now set this up, right? And again, if we refresh the page, it will actually show that it is set up. And lastly, if you've had an incident and you're setting this up as part of an incident, right? Google makes it super convenient for you. You can hit revoke all. This will automatically remove the trusted status from all of your other devices. Otherwise, all of your other devices actually become trusted devices. And here's the thing. If you have this configured on an Android phone or an iPhone or whatever, as soon as you've had that phone configured, your two-factor authentication works through their Google app automatically. So if you have the actual Google app on the phone, by which I mean the search app on an iPhone, or on an Android, if you just have an Android, it already comes with that push functionality built in. Every phone that you're signed into now automatically becomes an authenticator for it. So if you have any suspicion that your phone has been compromised, I highly encourage you to use this function and revoke trust from everything. Yes, it's inconvenient. You'll have to sign into a couple of accounts with two-factor authentication, but on the plus side, whoever compromised your account immediately loses access. So keep in mind that just by enabling two-factor authentication, that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have access to your account today. That just means it's going to be more challenging for them to have it tomorrow, right? If they haven't already established it. But the bad thing is if they do have it, they are grandfathered in because until you hit this button, they're not getting kicked out of those devices. I hope you found this informational and educational. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@iospatech.com. And we'll see you on the next video. Take care.